Okay, I messed this one completely up, folks. I was supposed to have this. My fault. All right, well, Kufar Akbar, everybody, welcome to another edition of the Crossing the Crescent discussion group. This is a live streamed YouTube show done every Sunday afternoon to differentiate between the truth of Islam and Christianity. We're here from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. every Sunday afternoon, usually. Sometimes longer, sometimes shorter. But if you want to participate in today's show, shoot me an email at ericthekefer, all one word, at gmail.com. I have my Gmail open. I did have my Gmail open. I'll open up my Gmail. If you want to participate in the show, I will send you the StreamYard link. We are blessed and have a real treat today. We have, it's kind of hard to squeeze this type of stuff in. Especially with all the news in the world going on today, with Israel and that conflict going on there. But what we want to do today is we want to revisit some of these topics that we have previously discussed on this show. And we brought our good friend, Mary Harb. You can't tell it's Mary because Mary's dressed up like she lives in Iran or someplace, Afghanistan, because she doesn't want to she doesn't want to entice any men there. But Mary is going to talk about Ptolemy and Mecca. And we've all heard this sorry excuse of many Islamic polemicists before, where they've come out and they've said that, well, we have proof that Mecca existed prior to the 7th century. And here it is. It's Ptolemy, this 2nd century curator of the museum, or the library in Alexandria. He says it right here, Mecca. Well, is that true or is that not? We have discussed on this show before why it's not true, but I was watching a presentation that Mary's going to do for us here a couple weeks ago that she did on Thaddeus's show, Reasoned Answers, and I like it a lot. So what we're going to have Mary do is she's going to give that same presentation, if not better, because it's on the Crossing the Crescent discussion group. She's going to put a little more effort into it. I've already assured her that. And let us know what she has come up with as far as why Mecca cannot be Mecca. Welcome to the show, Mary. How are you today?
I am great. Now, starting out, unlike some people, I do think that Islam started in Mecca. However, the entire story about primordial Mecca, this place that Abraham built and people visited for years and years and years, that's a lie, which means that Islam is false. Now, if you could move this Mecca some other place, you might be able to rescue it. Oh, it's over here where Abraham might have possibly visited. No, it really is in the Hijaz, but it really didn't exist then. It was built later. It was built far later, and Islam is a lie. It's not that people got tricked by the Abbasids or by the Umayyads. It is just a lie that anything existed anywhere where anyone was doing any pilgrimage at the time of Ptolemy in AD 150. Nothing. There was no place like this. There was no one had the black stone. No one cared about the black stone. The black stone was just another one of 10,000 pagan pretty stones that the stone worshippers just chose one day as a local stone to prop up and carry around and stuff because it looked really cool. They saw a really nice stone and it was big. If they saw a stone and it was small, they'd use it to wipe their butts. They saw a stone, it was like medium sized. If it was really pretty, they'd worship it. And if it wasn't, then they would use it to prop up their cooking pots. This is Islam, and the black stone is just another one of a million pagan beetles, they're called, Baetlys, and there is nothing special about it, and it didn't even exist at this time. It was in the ground somewhere. Nobody knew about, nobody cared.
Okay, so when you say this is something that they would, but once they find these meteorites in the ground.
Oh, they're not, it's not even a meteorite. That whole thing about being a meteorite, that's just a pretty lie. Oh, it's from heaven, so it must be a meteorite. No, it's just a pretty stone. Everybody who's looked at it close up has said that it does not resemble any meteorite in any way. It's too brittle.
I'm sorry. I think it's like onyx or whatever, the volcanic glass.
Yeah, somebody said the main theories now are either it's agate or it's like glass, and perhaps it's the type of glass that sometimes occurs whenever a meteorite strikes sand and then the sand turns to glass. Mm-hmm. But there is no plausible geologist who has gone, why, yes, this looks like a meteorite. All the geologists who have been able to get some kind of look at the little pebbles that are left have said that it's not, and it couldn't have broken like that. If it was an iron meteorite, it would not have broken the way it did when the Masons took it and threw it in their latrine where it belongs. So the fact that it broke shows that it is not one of the meteorites like they pretend.
Okay, so let's get down to Ptolemy. What are you going to tell us about Ptolemy?
Well, if you can bring up my presentation.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Bring that. Yes. Whoops. Where'd it go?
There we go. So the question is, where is Mecca at this time? Now, the Islamic sources say where it ought to be. It's supposed to be existing. Supposedly, Abraham is constantly traveling to Mecca to casually visit his son and his daughter-in-law. Just one day he comes by and he's not in, so he just leaves. He goes back. And then another day he comes by and he's not in, and he leaves again. He doesn't hang out because he's really close to it, right? He's really close to it. That is 750 miles as the crow flies, or 1,000 miles by ancient caravan roads. So
how many miles? Would you say how many miles ancient caravan ride?
So the caravan route did not yet exist at the time of Abraham, but according to the caravan routes that existed later, if you were going to Taif and then you were taking the bypass, essentially the small route through the mountains that's there, it would take you 1,000 miles, or 1,620 kilometers.
Okay, I thought you said 1,700 miles, and I was like, wait a second.
No, 750 as the crow flies, and 1,000 miles as
if you follow the roads.
If you follow the roads, and actually the modern highways almost all follow old roads, so you could actually see. This one does not show the major road. It shows a weird kind of bypass that's now the major road because Jeddah is a really important city. But there is actually a road that goes from Taif straight up to that straight part to Medina,
right?
Without ever going through Mecca, because of course, why would you go through Mecca if you're going?
You have to come off the plateau, sure.
Yeah, you're not going to climb.
Yeah. Also, let's point out the fact that when Abraham lived, was around 2000 BC.
It depends on what particular your particular chronology that you prefer. Either 1950-ish, whenever he came out of Haran, or about 750-ish. It depends on how you're reading the sources, or 1750-ish BC. And really the first evidence,
You said 17?
1750 BC is the most recent. That's the shortest chronology.
Okay.
And the highest
All right,
chronology
so
is like
all right.
1950.
2000 is round number.
So
People
yeah,
can
2000 round number.
wrap their minds
But
around that better.
But at that time, there was not an established trade yet. That kind of shows up around 1400 BC is whenever people kind of first start coming up from Oman and those places in Yemen up there. And then it's truly established by 1200 BC. So like
So
none of the roads would,
another anachronism.
it
This
would
is
be
something
an
that didn't
anachronism.
exist. All right, so there's something that didn't exist that has to exist in order for this to be true.
Yeah, and it's also just impossible distances. If you're going to visit your son and you're traveling 1,000 miles to do it, and he happens not to be in, you don't turn around and go home because his wife is the only one who's in that day. Like, you stick around.
What about the Barak? I mean, isn't that a reliable mode of transport?
Well, the Barak is only supposed to be, and people say that making fun of the story, but the Barak, yeah, is only supposed to be for Muhammad. So,
who knew?
I mean, it's a ridiculous story, and so people want to like kind of make the story less ridiculous by saying, well, maybe Islam started somewhere else. No, it really did start here, and the story really is that stupid, and it really is that untrue. And you can't find in any of the pre-Islamic poetry that is at all in any of the category that any person of any kind of like scholarly aptitude whatsoever believes to be legitimate.
Then how do they get away? How do they get away with telling this lie? Then, if there's no, if you're an academic, how can you continue to support this or believe this if you can clearly show that Abraham had no ability to travel these great distances?
No academic thinks this, though. They all agree that it's made up, unless you're a Muslim who just doesn't care about truth. Like the academics will just go, yeah, it's made up. And in fact, it doesn't exist in the pre-Islamic poetry that they think is genuine, that there is no reference to Abraham whatsoever in that poetry in conjunction with Mecca. There's no Ishmael in conjunction with Mecca. That originates with Muhammad. Muhammad makes this up to say, no, we're legitimate. I'm totally a real prophet. And in fact, my place is the most important place in the world, and this is why. And he makes something up. So it's all fiction. So there are other traditions concerning the building of the house. The Kaaba is supposed to be scum on the primordial waters before anything else is created. And then the place of Mecca is the first place to emerge from the waters before the other earths. And
Allah, they got the scum part right. They got the scum part right.
And Allah builds it like in Jannah. And then later, apparently he takes that one away and it just goes back up and it stays and it goes back up to Jannah. And then Adam has to rebuild it. And then there's the flood with Noah. And then Noah's Ark circles around the place. It does tawaf at the Kaaba that isn't there anymore.
Whoa, where's this at?
Lifted away. All of this is in, if you go to Al-Tabari.
Oh, it's Tabari. Okay.
Yeah, he talks about all these things.
Sure, okay.
And Al-Tabari isn't as embarrassed by the stupid things that Muhammad said. And so he'll include a lot more of the stuff that got washed out of a lot of the collections because it is so embarrassing. So you won't find a lot of the most embarrassing and stupid things in like Bukhari or Sahih Muslim. You won't find it there because it's been scrubbed out. But now after the time of Noah, it's gone for a while. And then Abraham comes and builds it. And here's where it gets really interesting. It says that here's the first house. Build me a house on earth, right? Abraham felt uneasy. So Allah sent the Sakina, that's Shekinah, as people like to say, Shekinah, right?
Right. Sure. Okay.
That's what it actually is. It's a borrowed word from Hebrew. And he had no idea what it was. But he says it's a gale force wind with two heads, and one head followed the other until they reached Mecca and coiled up at the side of the house the way the snake coils. Notice all this snake imagery. That's because the original Kaaba was dedicated to Wad, who was the god of the Minions. And the Minions were the first people to ever have a kingdom that included the Hijaz. And they're known in Ptolemaic sources, not this Ptolemy, but like Ptolemaic, as in like the Egyptians, right? From the 2nd century BC, talk about the Minions and their outposts and how they control all the frankincense trade through the Hijaz. And they have on the island of Delos, there is a standing stone with an inscription that's dedicated to Wad by Minions who traveled there and are like seeking safe passage and stuff. So their main god is this Wad god, who is, his name means love, which means he's probably the husband of Al-Uzza, because Al-Uzza was the main goddess also of the Minions. And his imagery is snakes and moons, because the high god always had an association with the moon. It was just like the high god equals moon. It doesn't mean that all the moon gods are the same, but rather our god is the high god, therefore he is the moon god, right? So we have all the snake imagery here, but it's given with Abraham and assigned to the Shekinah. And it's like, and then this sacred snake shows him where to build it. And then he builds it with the help of Gabriel. And then we have another story that is about the building, which says that, and this is a story of the Zam Zam well coming about, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, which makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, well, it's an excuse, right? They have this well that's inside their sacred place. Why should we keep this in our traditions? Because there was an enormous Hajj that had Mecca as like one of its main places, because that was the place of their high god. But the route that included Mecca also included the shrine of Manat. It included the shrine of Al-Uzza. It included the shrine of Quza, the archery god, who had a fire altar of some sort at the very border of Mecca. It had a lot. And this was just one stop. So we're getting rid of a lot of these things.
Now, this
And
is 2nd
Muhammad
century BC. Is this what you're saying, Mary? 2nd century BC stuff?
So I'm saying that none of this is actually happening yet. It's not happening in the 2nd century BC. This
Okay.
stuff is happening in Muhammad's lifetime as he's walking around. He's saying, you guys need to stop going to this site and this site and this site. But this thing that appears to be just as pagan as everything else, that's okay. And there's actually this hilarious story of him walking by a tree that was one of the sacred trees that had a bunch of things hanging on it. And it might be the same as the shrine of Al-Uzza. It's hard to tell because there's Al-Uzza is 3 trees, and then they walk past this tree that has hung things on it. So it might be the same thing. And they're asking, and they turn to Muhammad and they say, give us a tree like this tree. Basically, this is one of the pagan things that we want you to come up with an excuse to keep. And he says, no, this one is not one of the things of Allah. So he's coming up with excuses to keep all these pagan things, and he's trying to trace them back to Abraham to make them authentically monotheistic. These have nothing to do with Abraham. These are just lies, right? So here's, the lie of running back from Al-Safa and Al-Marwa, which they had idols on the tops of those in Muhammad's lifetime. And people were going from one idol to another, and they were on the top of these stony outcrops that were themselves like, even natural stone outcrops could be considered like sacred to these stone worshippers. And so he's coming up with the reasons. Well, this one's okay because we're just doing what Hagar's doing. And the Zam Zam is okay, and it's super special and sacred because it totally was around at the time of Hagar, and Allah gave it to Hagar. So these are all the excuses and trying to make these things ancient. And then at that time, and then he claims that the tribe of Jurham is the tribe that came, it's a Tahatanite tribe, meaning that it's from one of the divisions of the Arabs that they kind of mentally divided themselves into, that was more southern, but they were actual Arabs. They were not South Arabians. They were Arabs, and they spoke true Arabic. And that means they came from the Araba, which is the Jordanian Hara, probably only about 300 BC. So now in his story, he's having people from about 300 who only exist in the Hijaz around 300 BC and later. And not even their tribe necessarily has an identity at this point, but like people who speak the language they speak, the exact dialect that they're speaking, that will then branch off to the different forms of Arabic, that they only arrive in the window of about 300 BC. And he is placing, because they're the oldest tribe that the community memory holds in their heads, he's projecting them all the way back into 1700 or 1900 BC and saying that, oh, they went there back then because, and it's completely anachronistic by like 1500 years or more.
So he's taken 2,300 years of history and condensing it into,
right,
making it applicable only to his. This is why it's anachronistic, is because he's what they call a time compression, is what.
Yes, yeah. Everything is hugely time compressed. To people who are illiterate, they have like this horizon beyond which, if you go past the horizon of memory, everything gets mushed together into this kind of time where everything exists simultaneously in this vague sort of way. And this is what you're getting here, is you're getting people whose ancestors didn't even come to this area until about 300 BC, and suddenly they're already here, right? And so they also, they're so recent that they think that most people, that the native Yemenis are Arabic speakers, and they don't really know what to do with the South Arabian minority, that very small minority by the time of the 7th century, right? But they don't know what to do with this minority in their minds. They think that it's properly like Arabic speaking, but Arabic only replaced the old South Arabian languages as the majority language in the window of like the 1st century AD. And then it slowly died out after that time and became less and less common. So all of this is just huge amounts of things that are just incredibly anachronistic and confused because they don't have any real historical knowledge. And, you know, well, tons of these details are probably totally made up by the Sahaba. The core that Muhammad told is probably being faithfully relayed here, and it's all a lie. So the original gods, according to the Islamic tradition, the primordial gods in the primordial god list are mostly Yemeni. And so they do kind of remember that there used to be these gods in this area that then got replaced by these other gods who are mostly from the area of the Jordanian Hara and from Nabatea and that region there, where the Arab homeland rather than the South Arabian homeland. Okay. So there have been some recent really stupid polemics claiming that there's Mecca in the Bible. And this is Psalm 84, which were written by musicians who are after the time of David. And they're saying, how lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord of hosts, O Yahweh of hosts. My soul longs, yes, faints for the courts of Yahweh. My heart and flesh sing for joy to the living God. Even the sparrow finds a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may lay her young at your altars, O Yahweh of hosts, my King and my God. Blessed are those who dwell in your house, ever singing and praise. Now, where is this house? Oh, it says right here, blessed are those whose strength is in you, and whose hearts are the highways to Zion.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is all about Jerusalem. And yet
Exactly.
they'll claim that this verse, as they go through the valley of Baca, they make it into a place of springs. The early rain also covers it with pools. Well, this is a play on words. That
Well,
is
that's
also
one thing because I've had a discussion with the guy about this verse
a literal
because
place. Yeah.
he's trying to say that this, of course, is Mecca.
Well, where are
And
they going? Here's the question: where are they going?
they're going to
Zion.
they're going. Say that again.
Yep. They're going to Zion, which is Jerusalem.
Jerusalem, correct? Yeah. But my question is that if this is Mecca, if this is supposed to be Mecca, where are these pools of water located?
Yes.
I mean, it gets 4 inches of rain a year. There's no pools of water in Mecca. And of course, you pointed out the fact that Zion always in the Bible means Jerusalem. So
yes.
It's
Well,
another
these are
case of
people-
desperation.
Yeah,
Go
these
ahead.
are musicians. These are musicians of Jerusalem writing about people coming to Jerusalem. And as they come to Jerusalem, as Jews come to Jerusalem, as Israelites come to Jerusalem, they come through the valley of Baca, right? So they're saying that they are going from somewhere near Jerusalem down to Mecca
All right.
on their way to Jerusalem. And that's supposed to be plausible to us. Just because there happens
And then how
to
long
be
does it take to travel? How long does it take to travel? Would that take to travel by foot?
That
has
takes
anybody
nearly
calculated
60
that?
days. It takes nearly 60 days.
To go 2,000 miles.
Well, to go that distance, the caravans took about 60 days to go from Busra to Mecca. So that was a 60-day trip. So they go 60 days outside of their way, just so that they can go through a place called the Valley of Baca. And my question to them is, of course, they want to make it the Valley of Baca, right? Is Mecca a place of weeping and sorrow, and it's terrible? Because it's these pilgrims' joy going through a place called the place of weeping that instead turns into a joyful place of springs and pools. That's what's being said here. They're going through an awful place, a place that's generally awful, on their way to Zion, and because of their joy, it becomes a wonderful place. And instead of the water being tears, the water is now springs and pools. And it's funny because the Islamic sources will say that, in the time before the Jurham, right, before they covered it up, early on, Zam Zam was such a bounteous well that everything was full of greenery and wondrousness. And yet the story is supposed to be that the Jurham covered up whenever the next group comes, the Khuza'ah, who don't come in, only come about 350 AD, right? And that they cover up the well then. And according to this story, the Khuza'ah, do you know what they don't do? They don't just uncover the well. They live for at least 20 years without any water whatsoever, because that's what one does. Whenever one comes to a place and somebody has filled in the well, one just lives there without any water whatsoever, not a single well. And you just magically exist on rainbows and dewdrops as this beautiful garden all dies. And that's what you get in the legendary Islamic sources that supposedly they just, and they are supposed to be regular visitors to the site too. Like they're supposed to be pilgrims.
Can we back up to this Zam Zam well thing? So what you're saying is that Islamic apologists today are insisting that the Zam Zam well was able to provide enough water to provide for irrigation and the growing of food in Mecca.
In a couple of the sources that talk about the Valley of Mecca at the time of Ishmael, right?
Okay,
It's
so
supposed to be, but not at the time of in the Quran. It specifically says that there is nothing cultivated that grows in Mecca, and that you have to bring in all your food from afar. You cannot grow anything there. It says it very explicitly. It also says in it also talks about in the approved narrations in the ahadith, right? In these ahadith, it also says, look, it talks about how nothing grows there and nothing's cultivated there and everything's brought in. So in these fabulous tales that get included in folks and works like Al-Tabari and like in Ibn Ishaq, and those works, you'll get some of the more ridiculous stories like this, that, oh, it became this wonderful garden because Zam Zam was just flowing and wonderful and beautiful and stuff. So these are kind of like the later elaborations, sort of like, even when if you go to Ibn Ishaq, for example, you'll see that in his work, Mecca is a very small place and it's pretty pitiful in the way it's built. But then if you go to the sealed nectar, suddenly it's this wonderful sprawling city type of thing, is kind of the idea that's in it. So you have these layers of elaboration. And so whenever people talk about, the wondrousness of Zam Zam, it's like, well, why are you pumping in water that's desalinated from the seashore? It's because Zam Zam never provided very much. And Zam Zam did not exist at this time at all whatsoever. What Zam Zam was in the time of Jurham was that it was a about 6 foot deep well that was dug for people to throw in their sacrifices to Wad/Allah, which, like bracelets or money or those sorts of things, so that it could be like covered over with rocks so that people couldn't steal from the holy shrine and stuff like that. It wasn't a water well until Abdul Muttalib. He's the one who dug it out and hit some water, but the water tasted foul. No one ever used it for drinking water. And during his time, it was steeped in dried raisins and figs were steeped in it to make it palatable so that people would want to drink it. But do you know what you call it whenever you steep raisins and dried figs in water longer than about 12 hours? It makes wine. So this kind of makes you question what the rituals were concerning this special Zam Zam water. There are all sorts of discussions about the wine that's made from steeped raisins and dates. And after Muhammad said, "Oh, you can't soak it more than 12 hours. If you make it at night, you should drink it in the morning. If you make it in the morning, you should drink it in the evening," because it became alcoholic. So at this time, at the time of when Muhammad's a kid, everybody's drinking this alcoholic drink made with the Zam Zam water that otherwise tastes foul. It's so nasty that a later governor of Mecca called it the mother of black beetles because he thought it tasted like smashed bugs. So
I think I can't remember who was on the show, and they had talked about drinking from the Zam Zam. Well, maybe it was Al-Fadi had mentioned this, drinking from the Zam Zam well. They add like a type of flavor to it today. Maybe it was. Maybe
yes,
it was,
they do.
Yeah.
They also they pump in tons and tons of water from the ocean that's been desalinated, and then they make it taste really nice and sweet, so you feel like it's special. But people used to think that like nasty tasting water was medicinal or had magic properties because of it too. It's just a common thing in human history that if you have like this really mineral tart, awful water that people think that it's like good for them. So the biggest, they have, so Muslims have attempted to find Mecca, because Mecca during all this time, it's supposed to be built by Abraham. And then tons and tons and tons of people are supposed to be going to it every single year from the time of Abraham to the time of Muhammad.
Mhm.
That is the narrative. So it needs to exist. Even if there's nobody living there as permanent residents, it should be pretty darn famous if all these tribes are visiting this place every single year. And so they want to find it in any of the discussions of locations or history or whatever that exists in written work, because of course at this time the people of the Hijaz were writing like they didn't write at all for a long time, and when they finally started writing, they would write like nothing of interest to literally anyone. They would write their name and that they were missing someone. And that would be it. Not very helpful. So you need to go to outside written sources to find any kind of reference. So the first place that they'll go to is Ptolemy. And they and with Ptolemy, they say that they have totally found a Mecca in Makoraba. Now, the interesting thing is that this claim didn't actually come from any Muslims. It came from Westerners who were who at least they thought that the Islamic narrative would have some semblance of truth, and if some place has been said to be the most sacred place for all their people for hundreds and thousands of years, that they expected to actually find at least hundreds of years before. And so this was first, I think it was in the 16th century. Was first
right around
put
there where
forward.
they introduced it, right?
Yeah, they first put forward it as a theory. Now, a ton of other places have been suggested too, because Europeans just didn't even know where Mecca really was in the Renaissance. So they would just suggest places like vaguely in Arabia. But this is the one that kind of stuck because it seemed more plausible than any of the rest of them. So the original explanation for why it's called Makoraba was that Raba means the great in the northern Semitic languages, and that the great sailors of Phoenicia were in fact in cooperation with they were in cooperation with Solomon, and were down at the southernmost port on the Red Sea of Solomon and helped build some ships. So from that one piece of information, this person supposed that because Phoenicians have colonies elsewhere, perhaps these Phoenicians made colonies along the Red Sea as well, and so their language came to be there, and that's why it's called Mecca the Great, Makoraba. But no, all that's made up. Phoenicians never had colonies there, though they helped Solomon build boats. They never had any colonies down there and never settled there, and their language did not become embraced there. And Rabba does not mean the great in Arabic. It's a different root that means that. So that etymology does not work at all.
Have you read? I'm sorry for interrupting, but that's this is kind of a point to follow as far as the etymological origins of this word. Have you read what what's her Patricia Corona has?
I've read some of her stuff. She made some good points, but she doesn't. She was working on what they knew in the 1970s about the religious landscape of the world. So she had no idea what the religious landscape was actually like in the Hijaz and those areas at that time, because the work just hadn't been put in yet. So little, because the Muslim world is so backward. So little study had been done of any of the historical sites in that area at that time. So
well, what I'm talking about specifically the origins of when we look at the origins of the name Mecca and the origins of the name Makaraba, she says there's nothing there that would when we start looking at the language itself, there's nothing that ties the two together. Period.
There isn't, in terms of anything that's easily explicable. Like there is no etymological movement link from one to the other. So the first one was a non-starter. That's Maka Raba. It's just not possible.
Right.
But
okay, so I'm getting ahead of you. Sorry, I'll keep my mouth shut.
Yeah. Here is the best argument that can be made for it with a plausible root or connection, right? So it would have first been under Yemeni control. Although people who lived there for as far back as we know, they spoke ancient North Arabian languages, the power that first controlled this in a state-like manner was in fact the Minians, and they spoke a South Arabian language. And the knowledge that Wad was extremely well known there from all the different sources, and all the snake and moon elements and all of that being dominant there are suggestive of there might be this Yemeni connection. The Islamic sources do believe that Mecca's first owners were connected to Yemen, although they don't know that the Jurham were not, in fact, Yemeni natively. But what they suppose is that you go to this root MKRB, which in the Yemeni language is a legitimate word. We think that it is vocalized makrab and means temple. It would be the passage of the root CRB, which means carrying out an obligation. So it would be a place of carrying out an obligation, which was just a neutral name for a temple. So is Makkah from Makrab? Well, Rab as like a word at all didn't exist in Arabic yet. Maybe people who didn't speak South Yemeni began to call it Mecca. Maybe, right? In addition to the early etymology that wanted to make it Makkah Rabba the Great, or Makkah of Al-Rab, Makkah of the Lord, though the Lord also didn't exist in Arabic at this early stage in 150 AD. It would be borrowed later from Hebrew or Aramaic, so it's just not linguistically possible. So this is really only the linguistic possibility, and maybe so, but does that mean that that's what it is on this map? No. We also have to show whether or not it's plausible that it's on the map, even if it were called this. So
now hold on before you touch that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go back a slide where you had the map up there? Okay, where it says this is Ptolemy's map.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding is that we don't have.
Okay, so people are
map. We have locations because he was the first one to kind of use the meridian mapping technique.
So,
but we really don't have a map per se from Ptolemy.
So what Ptolemy did is that he gave longitude. Well, he drew a physical map, and then after he drew the map, he calculated out the longitude and latitude for other people to draw it later on, because he knew it would be much harder for people to copy his map than it would be for people to copy the huge lists of places and where they all are. So what this is a more recent map drawn from his latitude and longitude. And you notice I have here Egra misspelled, or it should have been Egra, not Erga, but Egra. Someone who was when the person who created this map created it, he just decided that the transcript or the manuscript of Ptolemy that we have now that says Egra, they must have just forgotten Najran, and so he decided to shove it in there, and the thing that had the closest spelling to it. But that's just something this map maker did. I chose this particular map just because it is the easiest to read and the clearest. But they all end up looking pretty much the same because they have the same latitude and longitude markers. So if people are going, let's look at this map. Oh, it's not there. Let's look at this map. Oh, it's not there. They're all being drawn from the same set of descriptions. So unless you get a map maker going wild here and changing things around because he thinks that there's an error in what he has, they'll look pretty much the same.
Question. So this map that you're showing, is this from before Muhammad or after?
Long
if you already
before
said, I
Muhammad.
apologize.
This is
Before Muhammad?
This is 150 AD. It's Ptolemy's map. It's the first time where there might be a Mecca. But I'm going to show you that the Mecca on this map is not Mecca. Like the Makaraba is not Mecca. It isn't.
Hey,
I will show you
Makaraba.
why. Yep.
Sounds like a song. Hey,
Here
Makaraba.
are a bunch of places that are probably familiar to you. For example, Petra is a familiar place. Faran is in the Bible, or Paran in the Bible, right? These are the Thamud people in the Quran. This is Duma over here, Dumat al-Jandal in Arabic tradition. There is Tema here. This is Egra, which is Al-Hijr in the Quran, and Lathripa is Yathrib. So there are a bunch of places we can recognize, and there are these tons of other places that no one really has any idea where it is. Some of these other ones can be identified, but a huge number of these, nobody has any idea what he is putting on that map. Nobody's figured it out. So, but it does show it south, but it shows it to the east and not to the west. But we'll see what's kind of going on here and why this kind of ended up happening. So against the possibility that Makro Raba means Makkah is the basic etymology. There are serious issues with even the way it's written in Greek. So there are some consistent changes that are made. They're kind of unique to Ptolemy's map, like switching things around in certain ways, but this is not one of them. The kaf, what you would expect to be chai, you would not expect it to be kappa. Kappa, you would expect to be the Arabic, I'll just say Q here. So this written, even though we do write the kappa as a K whenever we write it from Greek to English, the Greek to Arabic parallels are different. So you would expect the consonants of Makoraba to be MQRB. Now, initially you go like, oh, QRB, that is a great I keep writing triliteral root, because it can mean sacrifice. So MQRB would be a place of sacrifice. Oh, awesome. No, it only means sacrifice through a word that's borrowed from Hebrew in Muhammad's time. It was borrowed basically by Muhammad from the Jews that he hated so much, right? It had no previous attestation with that sense in Arabic or South Arabian. That's a dead end. QRB only means draw near. It's not used with that religious sense in Arabic at that time. So some other people try even more outlandish etymologies. None of that works. So we're already in trouble because what we thought was MKRB, which gives us our MK for Mecca, instead is MQ. Another thing that's against it is just the location altogether. Now, it's obviously not in the right place because it's clearly on a plain here. It's not in the mountains or below the mountains, like it's up on the plateau. That's not where it belongs. It's also east of Yathrib, not west. That can be forgiven because he's not that precise, but it being on the plain is kind of pretty seriously messed up. The Betias River is the only river shown in all the Hijaz in this map. Where is there a river anywhere in that part of the Hijaz? Rather, the wadis down in Yemen are way larger. So if you're like, hey, the entire coastline only has one river, no one would say that would represent something that is in that kind of Hijazi area. They would go, no, that has to be in Yemen because that's the only place there are wadis of any considerable size that flow much of the year. That gets a lot more rain than the Hejaz does. So then that leads to another point. Yemen and Oman are both extremely stretched and made far too large. The empty quarter and the empty parts of the Hadramaut are basically erased by Ptolemy's map. He just shrinks all the empty spaces down. He doesn't think they're big empty spaces. So it seems most likely that this Makoraba is actually in Yemen. So even if Makoraba refers to a temple village like a Makrab, it's probably somewhere
Mary,
in
I
Yemen.
hate to interrupt you, but how much further south is Yemen than where Makarabit is located on this map? I mean, we're talking 600 miles, 500 miles.
So it is a massive distance, but Ptolemy erases he erases all of these empty places. Everything that's empty gets shrunk down.
Right.
Notice
and this is the point that Ptolemy did not understand the vast size of the Arabian Peninsula.
No, and we will find out why he got misled.
Okay.
So
right,
he's reading from Strabo and is believing him. And I'll explain what Strabo wrote that made him think that no, there aren't these empty spaces. There are these towns all right next to each other because the whole thing looks like this. Town after town after town after town. And sometimes he lists the same town in multiple locations because he's just putting them all in because it just seems too empty to him otherwise. No, it's really that empty. He just doesn't grasp it. This Makaraba is also not called a metropolis. So he lists specifically which towns are larger and he calls them metropolises. And he does not call this Makaraba a metropolis. And even Yathrib is not called a metropolis, but Yathrib was called Medina by the Muslims. It only had like 3,000 people there, but to the first Muslims who got there, it was a big city. So they were coming from somewhere much smaller than that. So, but even Yathrib is not called a metropolis in this, and not viewed that way by Ptolemy. So, now, here's the smoking gun that proves that this is in fact in Yemen. So the first big smoking gun was the fact that there's this Betius River that is the only river shown there. And everyone would go, this has to be in Yemen. If there's only going to be one river, it has to be in Yemen. Well, guess what? I can't tell you how many hours looking at city after city after city after city, trying to figure out where they are. Well, guess what? Karna is Karnawa or Karnu, and it is the capital of the Minions. Remember, I've been talking about these Minions? So this is, notice it's spelled with a kappa, so you would expect a Q whenever you go to, if you're transliterating from Arabic to English, you'd expect the Arabic letter when transliterated to English. It's a kaf, but you would expect it to be a Q rather than a K, and in fact it is. This Karna that they have here is Karnawa, which is the capital of the Minions, and Strabo, and I have remembered Strabo because my folks who've been listening to my strengths have already heard about his the Aetius Gallus's campaign down to that area. But he says that the troops that were trying to invade Yemen, they began at the White Town. And that's a port in the kingdom of Nabatea. It's the Nabatean port that they actually owned. Gaza, and that's on the Red Sea. The Gaza on the Mediterranean, they were just kind of allied with. They marched, the army of Aelius Gallus marched from there to an unnamed city for a certain number of days that was also controlled by the kinsman of the Nabatean king. And I misspelled it again. I cannot spell for the life of me. That's Hegra, which was written as Egra by Ptolemy, and is written as Negron here because the map maker decided it had to be there. And then he blames the guide that it took them so long to get there. Not really all that plausible. But then they march 30 days out of that land and then 50 days to Najran, which is somehow completely missing from the map. That's why this map maker wanted to add it back again, even though he shouldn't have. He just tried to add it where he thought, because it's a major city, right? And then they march 6 more days to the river. Where's the river? Oh, yeah, it's the first river mentioned in here. It's the only river on the map. That would be our buddy here, Betius River. They campaign around those cities, including to Karna. It is called the largest city of the Minions by Strabo and is described after they arrive in Najran as being around that river area. And all of these places that they were marching were, some of them aren't easily decipherable, but they all seem to be probably within a 9-day march of Najran. And then they managed to march very fast up to the port of Hegra in 60 days at the end of this.
Okay, can I add something to what you're saying here, Mary?
Yes.
It's very important to understand the preciseness of Strabo. When they are on this expedition with Galus, they're starving to death. So what they would be doing is they would be going through every known village, hamlet, tent, whatever that they could find to find food to feed their army. And Strabo would be recording that along the way. And if you notice the route that they took, that Strabo took, it goes right through that region where Mecca is located today. And Strabo, along with, Agatharchides and all kinds of other cartographers prior to him and explorers prior to him, lists that area as being uninhabitable. So as Strabo's going through there and they're bringing this army through that region, he's listing it as people can't live there. So they're not going down there and looking, because nobody's mentioning this city of Mecca. Now this campaign takes place. When is this campaign? Is this like the 2nd century?
It's the campaign is in 24 BC, only 6 years after they took. It's the governor of Egypt wanting to conquer this too.
Okay, so Ptolemy is getting this information. He's getting this information from Strabo now. And keep in mind, Ptolemy is the curator of the Alexandrian library. He has access to all of these writings. So when he starts writing out where describing these locations on a map, he has access to all of the greatest writings, including Strabo's.
So
nobody mentions this Mecca place. Go ahead.
Well, here's the issue. So Strabo was saying that their guide was misleading them and leading them away from every town, and that's why it took so long. But it really is not. I mean, maybe a little bit, but really the things were that far apart. But since Strabo was saying, no, this is the fault of this guide, Ptolemy's like, oh, these places are all really close to one another. And so he takes out all those empty spaces and all those empty marching days where they didn't find anything, because he just believes that they're being kind of led just out of sight of all these towns. So that's why this map looks the way it does, because of the way Strabo was writing. Because he was patronized by Aelius Gallus. And if he said, Aelius Gallus was not prepared and he marched his army deliberately through an entirely empty area, and then it would make his patron look really bad. But his patron said, no, he misled us and we had no idea where things were and we had no ability to find it. And it's his fault that so many people died and that we couldn't find enough water and that we couldn't supply for ourselves, right? So this is what's happening here. Now, since Karna was described very clearly by him as the capital of the largest city of the Minions, Strabo says this explicitly, and that is absolutely true. What we found in archaeology, that Karnawa is in fact the Minian capital, then this Makoraba is to the south of the Minian capital. Minian capital, they are a kingdom of Yemen. So Makoraba is to the south of the largest city of a Yemeni kingdom. It must be in Yemen. It cannot be anywhere else. When Ptolemy was drawing this, he believed that this was part of Arabia Felix, Happy Arabia, Yemen, that it was there. He did not think it was in the Hijaz. He didn't even think that the Hijaz really existed much. He squeezed it all out. You go from Yathrib straight to Karna, like 2 days journey there in his map, because he believed Strabo's story that they were just being tricked and misled. So, Andrew, no, Metra is not on the same road from Lot City. They are not saying, the Quran says that whenever you're going up to Syria, you pass by a pillar of salt, right? He's not saying that whenever you're going like right out of the door or whatever. He's not saying that at all. We don't even know whether or not it's true. He just believes that it is. So there are lots of misinformation about what the Quran is actually saying, and we have to read it for what it really says. So here is something that shows you where that capital city is. It's right there. Ma'in there is the Minians. That's another word for it. It's the northernmost of these kingdoms. All of this is in German. Sorry, guys. But a lot of the stuff is in just transliterated into our Latin letters, so it's fine. But you see Ma'in there being the northernmost next to Saba. Himyar is already growing in this particular era, next to Kataban, etc. So Karna, this Makoraba, is south of the Karna. So Makoraba is absolutely on this map, located in Yemen and nowhere else. And it's deliberately located in Yemen by Ptolemy, and he knows that that's where he's putting it because Strabo describes it as being the largest city of the Minians, and the Minians are in Yemen according to Strabo. So there's no question that that city is in Yemen. There's also something very interesting because there is a town called Al-Makrab that is in Yemen to this day. And it's not that far from Najran. Now, it is actually north of ancient Karna, but it isn't very far north of it. So if he's just trying his best, and his geography is awfully messed up for most of this area, just because he has so little information, that it's not at all. There is I don't know how old it is. I don't know when it was founded. I can find no information, but there is Al-Makrab in Yemen. So it could just be a place where there happened to be a temple at the time that he, for some reason, knows about. Somebody told him about.
So that's your conclusion then?
So,
is that Makarab is located in Yemen?
Let's see. We're almost done.
Okay.
So more against Makoraba being Mecca is that that there are issues about the other cities and tribes that it does and doesn't have. It doesn't have Thamud, or it does have Thamud, rather. I showed you there. It does have Thamud. It doesn't have Jeddah, and it doesn't have Taif.
Okay.
Taif, absolutely, is founded before there is any reason in the world for there to be a Mecca there. And Jeddah, like, what would you be going to across? Why would you be going down at that particular place to the coastline? Who do you want to trade with? If you're taking this trip off the main road to a side road, who are you trading with? Jeddah probably has something to do with it, and the other tribes that are in that area, but they're not listed. Jurham is not even listed yet. It would be listed in a 5th century by Stephen of Byzantium. In his Ethnica, he lists Jurham, but he doesn't know about it here. Where's Thaqif? And they're the ones who control Taif. I think it's Thaqif, actually. I think it's a long I. So the tribe that controls Taif isn't there at all. Dayton isn't even there.
Do you
So
mind if I
how
ask
much
her a
do they
quick
know?
question? I'm
Go
so
ahead.
sorry. I don't mean to interrupt.
Go ahead.
So from the conclusions from your research on this, do you think that basically a lot of this information, like in movies, they do this thing called retro continuity, where they basically say, well, there's this story that existed that never actually existed. And then they, like there's a story in one movie, and then the second movie kind of changes the story of the first movie and says, hey, I'm going to insert all this information that wasn't actually in the first movie. That's the idea of the retcon. I'm just explaining that. So do you think that all of these cities and all of this story basically was kind of put into a story that really actually never existed?
So I think that all of the Mecca being super ancient was retconned by Muhammad. I do believe that Muhammad was born in the Hijaz in Mecca. I believe that it was an insignificant little backwater that had not existed as a permanent settlement where anyone lived full time for even 200 years.
Interesting.
And was probably originally set up whenever the minions went someplace, they would set up places to worship Wad and to ask Wad for protection, like wherever they went. So it was probably a beetle that was erected by the minions, but nobody lived there in like the 200s AD. And then eventually in the 400s, Muhammad's own tribe decided to make it this permanent location. And there was this effort. So polytheism as such was dying at this time. And there was this effort to legitimize polytheism in the face of the onslaught of Christianity coming in and changing what everybody believed in. And what Muhammad's tribe was kind of trying to do, what the other people on the Hajj circuit were, and a couple of other like rival Hajj circuits that would fight against each other and stuff. What they wanted to do is say, hey, look, you're saying that you should worship your God because he's the creator. Well, guess what? Our God, our high God, is the creator. And our high God, yeah, he created everything, including these other gods. These other gods are also intercessors and they should be worshipped too. And so we have this new syncretic pantheon where we claim things about our high God that you say is true about the God of Abraham, essentially. And that's true about our high God. But our religion is a religion for the Arabs. This is the Arab God, the Arab religion, the Arab deen, the Arab law and tradition and culture and all of this stuff. And when Muhammad first came around, he actually was trying to be basically more Jewish, Christian-y sort of thing. And he initially only called his God Al-Rab and Rahman, and only later started using the term Allah, and only later started adding in more of these pagan elements whenever his people rejected him really, really hard at first. So you don't, according to the best of the Islamic sources, the ones that people aren't getting really goofy with these super legendary things and all of this other silliness, what it says about Mecca in the 4th century, or excuse me, 4th century, they're not even there, in the 5th century and the 6th century, that they lived in round or oblong mud huts without even roofs until the 6th century. And in the 6th century, the first person started putting roofs on a house. And then later in the 6th century, the first person built the first oblong house with like square corners and stuff.
Who says this, Mary? I'm sorry, I didn't catch who's the source for this? Who says this?
You can find it, for example, in Kitab Mecca, or Kitab Akbar Mecca is one. You can find it in a number of other sources talk about this occurring, and these various people who introduce things. There was one tradition that said that square houses weren't even introduced until Uthman, but that doesn't one seems kind of unlikely. But there were Majid Robinson did a great study on the number that there were only 130 Meccans. The later people were absolutely obsessed with making genealogies, right? And the biggest of these genealogies, that's the most thorough, because everybody wanted to trace themselves back to Muhammad's tribe if they could, because then they would have like super special status and stuff. There were only 130 men of Muhammad's generation, which means that if you're talking about like the genetic families of these guys, that's like 550 people or so. Add in some slaves, add in some clients, add in some peripheral small settlement. You're at like 775 maybe. You're way under 1,000 people. When Muhammad gets to Medina, he does not trust latrines. He's terrified of latrines because his people have never used a latrine before. And it isn't until after 627, somewhere between 627 and 629, that his followers first start using latrines. Because in 629, there were some folks who converted to Islam because basically they were starving out in the countryside and the Muslims fed them because it was a big time of drought. And they were causing problems because of their poop being so numerous in the city, in Medina, city in quotes, right?
And paradise right there.
Yeah,
that sounds like that's San Francisco.
So, yeah. Why did the ayah of veiling come down, of hijab come down? It came down whenever the women would go out to go poop at night, men would harass them. And like Umar was stalking Sauda, right? He was stalking one of Muhammad's wives and sexually harassing her as she was trying to poop.
Yeah, because that's just sexy. I'm just saying, said no man ever.
Here's the thing. There's this very established tradition in Arab society of nightly assignations, like you'd go out at night and have sex with people. So there would be young men loitering around trying to look for women who might be receptive to their advances or might just be able to be grabbed and dragged in the bushes or whatever. And even today...
What's that called? What's that called?
Well, I said that it was it was a tradition of nightly assignations. So
nightly,
like...
okay, I get it. Okay,
sexual meetings, right? Right now, if you talk to anybody who has fought in Desert Storm and they were near villages at night and they had their night goggles, they will tell you that what they see are men going out to have sex with boys in the bushes all over the place. And that's because this tradition existed from that time. It just used to involve women too, but now they have latrines or flushing toilets and women don't go out anymore. But Muhammad did not have latrines for his people until sometime after the affair of Ifk, which was the affair of scandal where Aisha got accused of something in 627. She was still having to go out to the field to poop because they didn't have latrines yet, because Muhammad hadn't gotten over his fear of latrines. That's how backward this dude was. You cannot relocate these people to a place of civilization. These are not civilized people. Nor does any of the Quran reflect first, like having the text in your hand. They don't know the names of any of the wives. They don't get the details of anything right. They mix up chronologies constantly. They mess things up. When Muhammad is called on the 7 sleepers of Ephesus, and he's asked how many there were, he's like, oh, some say there were 3, and some say that there were 5, and some say there were 7, but only a few know. Well, apparently Jibril is not one of them, and Muhammad certainly wasn't, because he was never told. If he was hearing from Allah, you would think he would know, but he would also know if he were in a society where you had copies of these things where you could read it, and it says 7 or 8, depending on which tradition. It would say something, and then you could speak authoritatively. He asked, how long? And he couldn't come up with the length of time either, because he didn't know. He's telling everything from the second and third hand courses, and that's why the Quran is such a disaster and such a mess. He actually puts the Midians after the fall of Hegra and after the fall of Imran, the 7 pillars, Hud's location. And that's like 1,000+ years off, right? Complete disaster. So this is not the product of civilized people or knowledgeable people or anything. It is the product of a dude who's repeating stories that he heard and messing them up. The Quran is stupid, and it's a product of stupid people. One stupid person who said a bunch of stupid things, and other people who tried to cover for him, but could only do so much because everyone regarded it as sacred. So it's also important to know how unimportant this is. A real place. It's unimportant, but it was retconned by Muhammad to be the most important place in the world. Yet it can't be. Nobody's heard of it, right? Other cultures.
But wait, hold on, Mary, hold on. Don't you know, Neil Armstrong went to the moon, and right when the moon was right over Mecca, he heard the call to prayer, and he became a Muslim, and then when discovered the crack in the moon. How can you argue against such evidence? I'm just saying.
My goodness, you've convinced me there. That is truly an argument worthy of Muhammad's intellect. I'll put it that way.
And they make it all the time.
Yes. Other cultures have no idea about Mecca either. So I already talked about Stephen of Byzantium, and he has this geographical dictionary, which is called the Ethnica. Has Thamud, it has Jurham in it. Finally, that shows up. Has the Midians, has Medina, Yathribah. It has no Mecca, no Makaraba or Quraysh, because they're totally unimportant and insignificant. Procopius, and he's from Caesarea Maritima, which is it's the port that Herod the Great built, right? So he's like sort of in the region, kind of, right? He knows nothing of Mecca, nothing of Makaraba. He knows nothing of the Quraysh. He writes of Axum's conquest of Yemen, so he knows about that. And he believes that the whole of the Hijaz is under the dominion of the Himyarites, whom Axum conquered in his description, right? Now, that would have likely been the case, except for those who pass under the notice of the powers because they're so insignificant. So the Quraysh are very proud of being Lakab, or Lakah, not Lakab, or Lakab, but Lakah. I wrote that wrong, which means that they were not the clients of anyone, and they didn't have client tribes. They were free from all clientage systems. And the only reason that they could possibly be free is if the major powers didn't care that much about them, because the Axum, when it had conquered Yemen, it did successfully cause all of the tribes that had been warring and various things and uprising and stuff to fall back in line and become under them again. That's why the Meccans thought that Abraha is coming with his elephant against Mecca. He didn't know about Mecca, or if he did, he didn't care. He was going against Banu Amr, who are the people he actually cared about because they mattered. Mecca that he walked right by, he did not care about. And that campaign was completely successful. He was utterly successful in that campaign with what he set out to do. And what he did not set out to do is come to Mecca because he didn't care about it. So Mecca was established. If you take the ages of the people from Qusay onwards literally, and they might be a bit they are a bit wonky, but the earliest date that you can get for the establishment of Mecca as a place where people lived year-round is 430 AD, no earlier than that. And sometime for a short while before that, some local tribes came and worshipped there. That's all you get. Now, there are three ways of approaching the Islamic sources. Is a fideist approach where you just affirm whatever just because your sources say it. Doesn't matter how contradictory it is. Doesn't matter how ahistorical it was. Yeah, Midian's supposed to come after things that happened like 1,600 years later, but that's fine. The Quran says it's fine. And then there is the trail mix approach, and that's where you believe that the Islamic sources are mythologized aggregate that occurred through natural processes of different interest groups, and you pick out the obvious additions and try to determine what remains as history. So essentially, imagine that you had a big old bag of trail mix that was made a long time ago and that was left out. A bunch of mice and rats got into it, ate a lot of it, left their poop everywhere. If you dump out that mix and you pick through it, you can do a pretty good job of figuring out what was in it before the rats got to it, even though you're still not going to eat it, right? And this is my basic approach to it, because there are a lot of things in it that do have explanatory power, far more explanatory power than any of the alternatives that have been offered. However, there are a lot of things that are very obviously the rat droppings. And I'm not going to accept the rat droppings just because there are things that truly do have true explanatory power, right? And then the third approach is a fully mythological approach where everything in Islam is made up ex post facto from whole cloth by a central authority. And I don't think that one is plausible, because if an authority had the power and resources to completely make up something totally new and get a bunch of people to believe that they have always believed it, then you would certainly have the ability to make up something that is less awkward and stupid, more coherent, more cohesive, that where the Quran would actually say something like, the Jews and the Christians have corrupted their scriptures and I have come to correct them, rather than I believe in what is between the hands of the Jews and Christians, and then they have to spend hundreds of years telling their believers, never, never, never read what the Jews and Christians say, even though your holy book says over and over again that its own proof of its miraculousness is that it is able to reproduce exactly what is in the hands of the Jews and the Christians. That's what the miracle of the Quran is supposed to be, is it's supposed to exactly match stuff that is in the scriptures that Jews and Christians have. And that's what the Quran says. That's what it says about itself. You wouldn't have your holy book saying stupid things about itself that you have to cover for years after. It would be intelligent. It would not be embarrassing. It would be relevant to your age and not to the context of this completely stupid prophet. So that is it for my presentation.
Can I ask one quick question? I'm sorry.
No, you can't.
No questions ever.
Yeah,
No.
Issa, go ahead. I'm sorry. I got a couple myself. Go ahead.
I have one quick question. So I was thinking about when you had answered my first question. I appreciate you answering my question. You were talking about how the Arabs sort of developed a system where it kind of was taking like a god that already existed within the Arabian pantheon and then presenting it as kind of like the Lord God over the other gods. So I was thinking about, do you feel that this is sort of synonymous to like Egypt with Akhenaten, where Akhenaten kind of did the same sort of like monotheistic religion where Aten became the sort of like patron god over all the other gods?
It is very similar. So a lot of people get confused and think, oh, Akhenaten is some sort of like proto monotheist or something like that. But he really isn't. He has a high god and then the other gods who are below. it's really extremely similar to Zoroastrianism more than anything else. So in Zoroastrianism, there's an entire class of lesser gods below Ahura Mazda, who are literally, their names like literally mean those worthy of worship. So you do worship them, and you worship different ones for specific purposes. But the high god is Ahura Mazda, who is above all and who is the creator. And really, there was this heavy push towards syncretism before that did not exist. And on my presentation, I did 2 presentations on, I did a bunch of presentations on the pre-Islamic or religion in Arabia and rock worship and stuff like that. But the 2 most recent ones on Hubal, Allah is Hubal, and I talk about Wad and Hubal, and then like who is Allah? Allah is the moon god and all the lunar connections and everything else. And that also talks about the pagan Hajj and how so much of that was just adopted into the current Hajj. It's just it's the paganism hit with the monotheistic stick. And it talks about there are these different groups. There's the Hilla and the Hums, who are 2 different groups in the religion of the Mahramun. And the Mahramun are those that HRM, like haram, those who consider the sacred space to be sacred, right? So people who regard the Kaaba as being a sacred place are called the Muhramun, and they formed their own religious sect among the polytheists or among all the pagans, right? And the standard ones were the Hilla, who have more kind of a traditional paganism. And then after the year of the elephant, they introduced this new group of like these super special people called the Hums. And actually Hamas has the same root as Hums, by the way. It means zealot. And they adopted like additional practices and then applied restrictions on everyone else to like build up their religion as being more and more and more like Judaism or in Christianity in various ways. They introduced the rule that you can't kill your unwanted daughters anymore. The Hums did that before Muhammad. So they're like, oh, we needed Islam to keep from killing the baby girls. No, the Hums, the pagan Hums already did that. And the Quraysh also said, oh, we are the good, sincere, holy people now. We will no longer raid for female slaves to rape. So no more rape slaves, no more raiding for women. We don't do that anymore. And yet Muhammad goes and turns around and undoes that part of the Hums. So the Hums were better than Muhammad. They probably did that because they were scared after Abraha came through and they thought Abraha was coming to them because they were raiding everybody. And whenever they realized that they escaped, they were probably like, oh, well, now we'll become like good people and they won't want to like come and kill us all for raiding and stealing from all the nearby caravans. So that seems to be a major part of the motivation to create this Hums group. But it's so that they want to look legitimate compared to Christians. So that's really what it was. It was we are legitimate next to this other group. We're more genuinely Arab. We are the nationalist Arab religion that truly worships the creator in the correct way and all of this stuff.
And then there was a lull. Ethan, does that answer your question?
It does. Thank
Okay.
you. That was really
All right.
good, very thorough. I'm impressed. I'm very impressed.
She's a wealth of knowledge. I mean, you listen to
recently.
this woman, and for crying out loud, she could talk for an hour on that one subject.
It's
just
the
off the
weird
top of her
stuff.
head.
I'm impressed.
Here's the thing. The stuff that's just kind of weird when you read the early biographies and your eyes just kind of cross over like, what is even this? And you just flip to the next page. That's where most of the really important stuff is. That's what gets me. I'm like, oh, that's why this is in there. Like all of this Hums and Hilla stuff. Like the first time that I read this, my eyes glazed and they would have these enormously long names of this person, son of this person, son of this person, son of this person, did this really obscure thing that I don't care about. Why is it in here? and figuring out, okay, this is this tribe, and this tribe is related in this way, and this tribe is part of this alliance, and this is why this is written there. Like, is a lot of work. Like taking all of figuring out why these things are being written and who these weird groups were. So
Okay, I wanted to point out a couple things
Yeah.
that you brought up. Initially, we were talking about Abraham and the tradition of turning out Hagar from Mecca, and in 2000 BC, 1900, whatever. Abraham
Yep.
turning out Hagar. Okay.
At least 1500 or 2,500 years before Muhammad. Let's say
Okay,
that.
so a long time ago in a land far away. The Zam Zam well that magically appeared to Hagar. This is after he turned her out and she's out wandering in the wilderness. The Zam Zam well that she happened upon is 21 meters from the Kaaba.
Yes. Well,
why don't Muslims put that together?
Well,
she doesn't
happen upon it. It's supposed to miraculously burst from the ground and nothing was there before. But it gets weirder because all of these stories kind of... So what happens with legends is that you get this one little legend here. And then you get this other silly, weird little legend over here. And then you get this other weird little legend over here. And they don't actually fit together because different people made them up at different times.
And that's the point. They don't fit.
So here is the series of events. Event 1. In this story, again, Muhammad did not have access to the actual text. So how old is Ishmael? He's an infant. He's breastfeeding. And she doesn't get turned out. Muhammad is with her and then just leaves her there and says, I leave you to the care of Allah. He will take care of you. In a place without any water. And so she sits there, she drinks the water, and then she goes, oh, I can't bear to see my infant die because I don't have milk anymore because there's no, because I don't have any water. And then suddenly she starts running from the top of the hill to the top of the next hill. And that's also an important point. I've heard, oh, well, they aren't really mountains, so it must not be there. But the issue is that they're running in the story and also in the Hajj, you run from the very, very top of one of these little stone outcroppings to the very top of the other, back and forth, 3.5 times, but you climb one of these 7 times minimum. It might be 8, depending on how Muhammad did it. It's now fenced off, so you can't climb it, but the equivalent of that climb would be climbing Pikes Peak from the base, from where you're allowed to start climbing, all the way to the top. That's how much of a climb that would be if it were, for example, the 2 mountains in Jerusalem that people claim, oh, well, it must be the mountains in Jerusalem because those are real mountains. No, this is clearly something that isn't real mountains because it's done 7 times, right? It's something small that people can
Safa
physically
is
do in an
65
afternoon.
feet tall. I had this in a slide,
Yeah.
so I brought it up. Safa is 65 feet tall. Mar was 75 feet tall. And
Right.
they're 450 feet, a football field and a half
Now,
apart.
Of course it's stupid that she would go back and forth between them because this never was done by any... Hagar never did this. It's made up. It's an excuse to do something that was a pagan activity of devotion. It was a pagan devotional activity to go from the top of one rocky outcropping to the top of another rocky outcropping. And there had been like idols at each one. And so that was specifically a pagan devotional act. And Muhammad's trying to hit it with a monotheism stick. Well, why do we do this thing, which is so obviously to go and worship the idols at the tops? And he goes, oh, no, it's because Hagar did this.
Mm-hmm.
And then the story is that the well gets miraculously provided by Allah. So before it was closed up, and then Allah causes it to flow suddenly and creates it himself. Mm-hmm. But they're just left there. What do they eat? Nothing, apparently, because there's no food still.
Because
But
it's
then,
a desert. That's
yeah,
why they don't
but then
eat
there's
anything because there's a desert. There's no food. Exactly.
But the first story that Muhammad told about Ishmael being there was about Ishmael and Abraham building the Kaaba.
Right.
And the whole reason that this was told is because the Jews had just forcefully rejected Muhammad
Mhm.
and said, "We don't believe in you. You're full of it. You're not a real prophet. We don't believe anything you're saying." And he suddenly comes and they said, "You are not a real prophet because the Arabs are from Ishmael." He had never even heard of Ishmael. But they come out with, "You're from Ishmael. That's the other son of Abraham. And all of the prophets come from the line of Israel. And you're not from that line." So before that, he had been saying he is a prophet like Moses. And they pointed out that no, the prophet like Moses has to be from Israel. It says it right here, because he was told that by Waraka, who knew a little bit more than he did. So then he makes up this new thing where he takes the words of the prophet like me and he puts them in the mouth of Abraham, talking about himself and Ishmael. So there will be a prophet who is from among us, who is like us. It even has that double us, like it does in Deuteronomy, or like you, and in Deuteronomy 18:15, that they always want to skip over and go straight to 18:18. It has that same double phraseology too. And he puts it in the mouth of Abraham while they are building the Kaaba. So at that moment, he makes up the idea that Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba. And now that's why we're going to face the Kaaba, because the Jews have said that we're not from you. Well, I'm saying that Abraham said that there'll be a prophet like Ishmael, and he built the Kaaba, so we should bow to it as the first temple or whatever. Like
Right.
I have a
that's what
question.
he's doing. He's creating that. Yeah.
I have a question. Can you bring up your last slide, the last point?
Yeah.
You mentioned, would you call it the Herculean, the fully mythological approach where everything in Islam is made up ex post facto? So you reject that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I
By
absolutely
essential
do.
authority? Okay.
Because no one in the history of the world has ever been able to do something like that. What
No,
you do
I
get,
no,
what
well, oh,
you
go
get
ahead,
is
sorry.
like charismatic leaders who
Mhm.
convince people, just like Muhammad convinced people something that happened in the ancient past. The central authority is supposedly teaching people they are like recasting what their own parents and grandparents did. Your parents told you this, but it's not true. Here's the truth. Your
Mhm.
grandparents said this. Here's the truth. Now we're going to manufacture new genealogies for all of you, and you're just going to believe it. Well, you wouldn't believe that. They were so. Umar and Abu Bakr both forbade people to transmit hadiths. Let me repeat that. People were not supposed to be transmitting a hadith during the reign of Abu Bakr or Umar.
Where do you get that information?
If you look at it's in the sources. If you look at like history of hadiths or something like that, you can find the quotes.
Okay.
So,
You
supposedly
see,
Abu
and
Bakr.
who'd you say again, Mary? I'm sorry.
Here,
Is it?
here,
I don't need a name. I just is this
right
part
here.
of the
I
Hadith
just put in
literature?
here. Here's the YouTube or Wikipedia link. How about that? During Umar's reign as caliph, hadith were not being narrated by the people. Many sources say it was Umar himself was the first person to ban hadith, and then there are various views and summaries and stuff. And the reason was because Muhammad's theology radically changed during his life. When you are with someone who's super charismatic and you're in a cult, when they wake up the next day, just like Joseph Smith, for heaven's sake, Joseph Smith
Right.
originally taught modalism, right? And he kind of taught Trinitarianism for a while. Then he switched to modalism, and then he switched to tritheism and to polytheism, and all the rest of that. Like he changed, but he was really charismatic, and he convinced people that all of these things are true and that they definitely don't contradict what he was saying like 2 weeks ago.
Right. No,
And
I get that. I get that. But
yeah,
but the thing is, okay. So, how to put this? Okay. Was there a Mecca? Was there a region? Was there an area? Obviously, they came from somewhere. They came from Saudi Arabia. Well, they came from the Arabian Peninsula. Was there actually a charismatic Muhammad?
absolutely, there was.
Well,
And the
there
reason,
may have been. Well, hold on. There may have been a composite of holy men, because Muhammad is just a title. It just means the praised one.
no, it doesn't.
So
Who told you
it
it
means
meant
the
that? They
praised
should have
one.
told you that.
Muhammad. Yeah,
That's
it
not
means
what
the
it
praised
means.
one or the one worthy of praise, something like
Nope,
that. Okay, what
still
does it
doesn't
mean?
mean
What
that.
does it mean? What does
So
it mean?
let's
What does it
look.
mean?
So it's a mouthful causative form, but it is a mouthful causative form as a noun, as a name. So, for example, you have the name Al-Mughira, which is kind of it's a title, right? And its root is to raid, right? It does not mean the raided one. It means the one who makes raids.
Okay, well, what does
Al-Mutalib.
Muhammad mean then?
Hang on.
Okay, well,
Well, let's find out. Al-Mutalib does not mean the one who is sought. It means the one who is who makes many religious seekings.
Wow.
Masjid does not mean the place that is prostrated. It means the place of making prostration. Yes. So Muhammad, following that same pattern, the normative understanding of that would be the one who makes many praises, because the shada, that doubling there, is an intensification that often means repetition or
okay.
or makes extreme praises, like the one who makes great praise or the one who makes many praises. So it is of a worshiper, and it was an ordinary name. Other people are named that who are older than Muhammad the prophet.
Do you have any proof of that? Because
So Muhammad ibn Maslama, and his father's name Maslama was another ordinary name, and it's not the one who is peace, but the one who makes peace is what that name means. He was a person of, so Muslims are trying to trick you when he says, or they just don't know. They're just suckers, right? Because they get lied to. That, oh, Muhammad was given this name because he was just super special. Everybody knew how special he would be. And they turn around like 5 minutes later and nobody ever knows that he's going to be a prophet. Everybody's surprised. Muhammad himself thinks he's possessed and he's trying to kill himself. But somehow everybody knew he was going to be a prophet, right? Obviously, these both can't be true. Obviously, the one that's made up is that everybody thought he would be a prophet, right? But the fact that other people, it wasn't a common name, it was an uncommon name, but other people were given this name as a birth name. At birth, they were called Muhammad. And now there is a story that his name was Qutham, because he was going to be named after a son who had died at birth. Now, here's the interesting thing. There are two different traditions as to who wanted to name him Qutham and who wanted to name him Muhammad. And I actually believe that it was Amina who wanted to name him Qutham, and it was his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, who said, no, he's going to be named Muhammad. And the reason is because his grandfather still had doubts about his paternity. So he's giving him a name that's respectable, but is not the name of his own dead son. Because Amina was making claim. Amina never breastfed Muhammad. Why didn't she breastfeed her own child? So do you know about the law? So she wasn't being financially supported by the family at the time that she gave birth. And by law of tradition, she gave birth 4 years after Abdullah died. Right. So what she was doing, she's saying, this is Abdullah's child. And they're saying, we're not so sure about that. And she says, I will not feed him because he is his child, and it is a male family's financial responsibility to give me money to provide for this child. in a mahr marriage, or to provide someone to breastfeed the child in my place. I am not required legally to feed this child unless I get compensated for it, because this is his child. And his family is like, I'm not so sure about that, except for Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab immediately sends his wet nurse slave, Thuwayba, over there and says, you nurse the baby to make sure that the baby lives. I believe that this is my brother's son. So you nurse the baby, you take care of this baby. And Abdul Muttalib is convinced. He takes Muhammad before Hubal. And it just explains a moment before in Ibn Ishaq that the reason that you take babies in front of Hubal is if you doubt their paternity. But then he has him praising Allah as he stands in front of Hubal. Is he really praising Allah, or did he take the baby in front of Hubal to have the things cast for paternity and to determine whether or not he was actually Abdullah's son? Well, it came up that it was Abdullah's son. And so he still refused to support Amina, and he paid for a wet nurse to take the boy out into the countryside instead. And he also, I believe, he refused to have the boy named after his dead son as kind of a replacement son, as kind of like, you take care of him, you adopt him in family, you support him, all that sort of stuff. And he gave him a different name that wasn't a family name. And so people were asking, why are you giving him a name that isn't a family name? He's like, oh, it's an excellent name. It's a religious name. It's a good name, that kind of thing. And so he was taken out for 4 years before he was finally brought back, before the foster mother was finally like, I'm done with this kid. Here, dumped him back on Amina. And then 2 years later, Amina's in Yathrib. And they said it's to visit her relatives. Do you know how many relatives Amina had in Yathrib? Goose egg, none. She had a stepmother who was only briefly her stepmother before her dad died, who had brothers in Yathrib, but that wasn't her relatives. That's her stepmom's relatives, and she had no business visiting them. So I think that she was like a traveler's wife, and that's like what she did to support herself after Abdullah died. So she's coming back to Mecca, probably to say either give me more money for this kid, or he's old enough you can support him for the rest of the time now. And she dies on the way. He ends up going there. He's with his grandfather for only 2 years, and he dies. So he's basically been ripped from the only mother he knew at 4. His birth mother dies at 6. His grandfather dies when he's 8. So of course he's a psychological wreck. So that's why I think he was named Muhammad.
Right.
Rand,
Okay.
Can I get a question here, Rand? Can I?
Well, hold on.
Going to stay till 5, and we're 50 minutes past her bedtime. So.
All right. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mary. Mary, I really appreciate you staying on for almost the entire show. I really do. I had just a couple questions about your dating on all of this. Have you read Islam in Light of History by a guy by the name of Rafat Amari? Have you read any of his work?
I haven't read that, but I have read a fair amount of the what I'll call the revisionist schools. I haven't gotten to that, but I am going to go through all of them and point out their issues and errors and things, because I really think that this does come from a dude named Muhammad who lived in Mecca. It's just that Mecca was a backwater and he was a fraud.
And so nobody would mention Mecca because it was a backwater. Right.
Well, it is mentioned in the pre-Islamic poetry. And for a while, okay, so there were like 3 phases. Phase 1, everybody took all the poetry as if it's semi-authentic at minimum. And then there was phase 2, where everybody dismissed every single piece of poetry. And now there's phase 3, where people are distinguishing between the circumstances where forgery was very common and the context where it wasn't, and noting both the agreement and disagree. Like, there are ways in which the poetry agrees with the Quran, in which it disagrees with the vast majority of the kind of later Islamic material about what the pagans believed, right? So the Quran's accusing pagans of believing certain things. And then you go to some of the sources and you get kind of these odd ideas that are pretty different from that. But then you go to this pre-Islamic poetry and it agrees with that and fits in with certain ways.
But it meant you're saying the pre-Islamic poetry mentions the Mecca by
yeah,
name.
it mentions Mecca. Do you know what it says about who built the
this
Kaaba?
is the first I've heard of this. Go ahead.
It says that the Jurham and the Quraysh built the Kaaba. And remember,
and this is from which source is this?
This is pre-Islamic poetry. Bone Breaker, Score Settler by Nicholas Sinai. So look at his explanations. I'm not saying that all of it is authentic or hasn't been meddled with, but enough of it is. It matches, and where it doesn't match in some places, it's very uncomfortable for the Islamic narrative.
Okay, so when the common mantra is Mecca is not mentioned by name until 741. That's not true then.
It is not true if you go to the people who are living in this area. It was so
it's not it's not mentioned in any other literature outside of Islamic literature with the hadith. That's you think
well, I mean, they were pagans.
Or whatever, right? Okay, but it's not mentioned anywhere until 741. That's not true because this Nicholas Sinai in this book that cites pre-Islamic poetry as a source for mentioning Mecca.
The pre-Islamic poetry was kept in oral form because they were not writing people until
it was an
later
oral culture.
on.
I get that, sure.
So it was an oral culture, and these are oral traditions that are preserved. Some of these are highly mucked with, some of them are forgeries, but there are certain genres in which there is very little Islamic meddling, right? And within these particular genres, you can get ideas of things. There are also reports of the Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance, right, from other places that have some really, really telling things. For example, we find out why Muhammad is called, why you say Allahu Akbar. What's he greater than? You go to the Talbiyah of the pagans and you find out that they said Allah and Al-Uzza are great, but Allah is greater. Mm-hmm. That is what that's from. It's from the pagan saying about Allah being greater than the pagan goddesses because he's the first god and they're just the intercessors. You'll find, and then that matches beautifully with Herodotus talking about how they have the goddess Aliat, whom they call the Great. So there's Alat the Great, and then Allah is greater. That's where it came from. It came from.
But if you have Alat, Aluzza, and Manat, these are the gods of Talmud of Nabatea up in that region. Okay,
not exactly. No, so Nabatea itself appears to have uniquely combined Al-Uzza and so there's Ishtar and Asherah. So Ishtar is Venus, Asherah is the mother goddess. Sure. In Nabatea, for some reason, they squashed the two together. And Alat started out as this squashed combo goddess, but then they adopted Al-Uzza as their high goddess, and she was identical to Alat. So it was just another name for Alat in Nabatea. So they aren't really two goddesses. Wherever in a particular town.
We're talking about a region in northern Arabia, not in Hijaz.
Correct. And this is something that's unique to Nabatea. Nabatea alone appears to have completely combined the two. Wherever there's Al-Uzza, there is no Alat. Wherever there is Alat, there is no Al-Uzza. They seem to be names for the same goddess. Depending on which town
Muhammad is referring to when he says that Allah Akbar God is greater. My God is greater than.
Yeah, and those were two of the gods. So outside of Nabatea, they were distinguished again. So Alat is the mother goddess, and Al-Uzza is Venus. But in Nabatea, they got wonky for some reason. Then they don't have those distinguishing marks. So Alat is and then Manat got added later. You'll find this part of the reason that people are saying wrongly that these things are like somehow uniquely of the Hara, the Jordanian Hara, and the Araba, that northern region, is because that's where all the religious writings are. If you go down in the Hijaz, people don't write, they rarely write, and when they write, they're writing like non-religious things. They're writing their names and they're saying that they are remembering someone or yearning for someone, but they don't say with the help of what God. So because they're just not being very religious in their writing.
Okay, I have one more question. One more question, then we're going to have to wrap it up. Okay, so the Mecca itself, when we look at all the ancient maps, and they list all these for number one, Makaraba was only mentioned one time, and that was by Ptolemy. Nobody ever mentions Makaraba after Ptolemy,
along with tons of other towns that we could never
right.
identify.
And why? And if you're going to say that Makaraba is it, why isn't this on any other map, or is it mentioned by anybody else? But the thing that I wanted to
it didn't exist at all at that time. Like nothing existed there. It existed at all as like a waypoint shrine in the 300s in the Islamic sources. The first time people lived there permanently is
the Islamic sources say that Ishmael built a Kaaba.
No. Listen. According to the Islamic sources, the first time that people built houses there was in the time of Qusay, which is about 430 AD, according to their own chronology. So the Jurham, who later on get assigned this wonderful whatever, they have no permanent buildings. The Khuza'ah have no permanent buildings. The Qusay, the founder of the Quraysh, have the first permanent building. So there are these extreme contradictions in the Islamic sources. Some are based on the traditional history of Mecca, like Qusay built the first permanent buildings, and some are based on the things that Muhammad farted out of his mouth. Oh, it was built by Ishmael. And they're in contradiction. Right? So, yeah, the folks who are saying, oh, it's in Palmyra, Syria.
Okay, well, that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make here is that Mecca, being this major, most important city in all of human history, does not show up on a map until 900 AD. Any map? Do you know of Mecca appearing on any map? Because you made the great point. It's a very important point to know that this is a very oral culture, and of course they're not going to be. Number one, there's nothing to make paper out of to write anything on in the first place. So of course it's going to be an oral culture. However, there are people that are supposed to be trading in between that region, namely in Taif, which is close to where Mecca supposedly is to occur. But nobody on any of these maps, even the ancient trade maps by anybody, places
I don't
Mecca
think
there.
Taif appears on one either until then.
Taif, I can.
Where's the earliest one that I think? Well, I think. Wait 1 second. I think maybe did.
I have it.
Yeah,
here.
Stephen of Byzantium still didn't know about Taif.
Yeah,
because it was really small. But there's also, there's no Taif there either because it's so small and unimportant. It's not that it didn't exist. It's that nobody outside of that, no one who made maps cared about the place or had heard about the place. So that's really the distinguishing thing, that no one who is a map maker has heard about or cares about the place until a much later point. So, yeah, Mecca does have a wadi going through its center. And if you look at where the old buildings were, they were like up on the sides with these big, and they talked about how they would walk in the stream bed and things like that, because it is a very silly place to build anything. But, they built things on it, and they built things on it later too. They built things on it in times of Muawiyah and Abdul Malik and all of the various governors of Mecca tried to improve it and make it look cooler, although it's very embarrassing. Here's the thing. If you are going to have a very important temple for your society and you get to choose where it is, you would want to put it in your capital or in a very important trade location to get even more trade there. You don't want to put it in an armpit. And Mecca is like the armpit of the Hijaz.
Well, here's the hypothesis, and we're gonna go. Is that the Umayyads, their capital was up in Damascus, and if you are going to formulate a religion and base it upon locations, this is exactly what you would want. This is what you would if you were going to fabricate things, and this is why I'm going to admittedly disagree with you on this. This is exactly what you would do. You would make up this location in an almost a non-existent area people are very unfamiliar with, and you would develop after the Abbasids take over a century later. You would develop this tradition, these oral traditions of the Hadith to parallel what the Jews were doing as far as their Talmudic literature or their Talmudic practices were concerned. This is exactly what you would expect.
So what parallels do you have to that history?
I'm just going to say this. I'm going to look forward to your presentation when over on everybody. If you want to find Mary, she's on Reasoned Answers. It's a YouTube channel with Thaddeus Stevens, and Mary is like, you basically run the channel. I'm playing.
Yeah, but I'm there every Tuesday, so I'm the most regular person.
And so I see he's got like this score. What is the score thing he's got going at the top?
So if it's based on people who chat, how many points they earn. They can earn points by chatting and stuff like that. So he's written a whole bunch of scripts and fun.
Who monitors this? I mean, if you have somebody on the side that monitors and said
no, it's automatic. It's a script.
No kidding. Oh,
we got to get that. We got to use that software. That's pretty cool. We got to get away from this StreamYard stuff, dude. This is like so pandemic StreamYard.
Well, it's like easy for me to use, and that's what we need because these guys right here are not big.
Right.
All right, we're gonna call it a day, guys. I'm late for church already. Look what you're doing.
Wait, real quick, just to let you know, it's heated up. Hezbollah has officially joined the site. Heavy fighting on the northern part of Israel right now. Massive airstrikes going on in Gaza at the same time, according to the Twitter feeds. Okay, no real confirmation yet in the actual legitimate news sources, but I get all my news from Twitter because they seem to actually, the dudes on Twitter actually seem to post up, and then 30 minutes later you see it on the regular news sites. Anyway, massive airstrikes, massive fighting going on right now at the Lebanon and Israeli border in the north. So pray for Israel. Pray for the destruction of the enemies of God. And, well, even if you don't believe that, just pray for the destruction of these terrorists. Anyway.
I would ask people, and I appreciate that, Rad, as far as this conflict going on in Israel, I'd ask people to pray for those people that are in Gaza, that are part of Hamas, that are part of Hezbollah. No, I actually that God would pour his spirit. The only thing that can save these people and change their hearts away from this hatred this visceral hatred that they have for God's people is Jesus Christ. And I was asking God's spirit would be poured out on them so they would come to know the true Savior that we have.
I'm okay with that. I'm good with that, or his wrath. Either way, I'm fine. But point being is this, okay? It's really heating up. It's starting to get scary. Poor Steve and his friends out trapped in Gaza. Not Steve. He's not trapped there. But then also his family in the West Bank. This is very hairy stuff, man. So pray for the people. Pray that the Christians are safe. The church is saved, and whip out the can of whoop ass on the Hamas. I'm just saying. I'm just whatever.
Okay.
Put the cold clothes.
Mary, I really appreciate you spending your afternoon with us. I know you're a mama, you got kids, and you're busy with Thaddeus and that. So we really appreciate you coming on here and sharing with us what you have on Ptolemy Mecca and its origins. I'm going to try to see if I get Thaddeus on here someday too, because he's kind of a bank of knowledge. I'm just going to, I mean, if I was going to ask Thaddeus to come on, what topic does he enjoy the most, do you think?
Probably he probably just likes explaining Old Testament theology and how Old Covenant and New Covenant and what the Old Covenant means and what its purpose was and everything else.
Okay. Well, actually, next week's topic is the Trinity in the Old Testament. So I'm going to send him an email and
all right.
see what he has to say. All right. Everybody that was in chat today, thank you for coming. I appreciate you. I know you guys can be doing all kinds of other things on your Sunday evening. And we will see you next week on the Cross and the Crescent.
Cold close.
I'm closing with
advanced student and specialist, that the standard narrative has holes. That's what
that the Muslims were rioting against one another. And as much as we don't want to face the fact, the Muslims were lying sometimes. They were fabricating, they were embellishing, and that might be hard to accept, but that is a reality.